already, and we will officially get started. So yeah, thank you again for being here and joining myself. Again, this is Mark Maneri for those of you who just joined us in the last minute or two. And I'm joined by my colleague and co-host Larry Walters. We're speaking to you from Orlando, Florida. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we are in either the late 8th or early 9th year, both Larry and I, of hosting this webinar platform. And we are just thrilled to have you here tonight. So with that being said, you've got quite a graphic on the screen right now. And I know that as I look through the attendees, there's several of you that have been with us before and you've seen this, and I also know there's a number of newcomers. And if you're seeing this for the first time, well, I can only imagine what might be going through your brain, because I remember when I saw this for the first time about a decade ago, more like, 11 or 12 years ago, and this number was right around 71,000 or 70,000. Well, this is 2 years removed, or 3 years removed, so this number is well over 75,000. We have a tax system that is broken, and you probably don't need me to say that to agree with it. But for the better part of the last 50 years, we've put thousands of pages of Band-Aids on something that doesn't really align with our capitalistic democratic society. And our tax code is really stifling. And we need to move to something that really represents and empowers who we are as a country. And our current tax code doesn't do that. In fact, our current tax code, really has a lot of barriers to it. And so there's 7 of them that we like to highlight. So number 1, as you just saw, it's extremely convoluted, and there's just no 2 CPAs that could ever figure this thing out in the same way. It inspires the wrong behavior. So think about that for a second. The more money you or a business makes, the more the government takes. And there is a certain threshold that every business really passes through and crosses that has them go, it's just not worth it based on how much money the government's going to take from it. And they stop. That's not what we want. So there's a real lack of transparency. We'll talk about it. Obviously, incredibly inefficient. We'll talk about all of these in detail. It impedes privacy. There's winners and losers. So based on really your status and who you know and your financial resources, you can win in this thing. And if you're not well connected and you're undercapitalized, or don't make a lot of money and you don't know who's who and know how to hire the right experts, you're going to lose. You're going to pay more than you should be paying. And for me, the big one is it's extremely time intensive, and as a self-employed business owner, I can really attest to this. And so we are going to single-handedly demonstrate to you how the Fair Tax removes these 7 barriers and puts us on the right path and really creates alignment between a piece of legislation that properly represents who we are as a country and the capitalistic and democratic society that we are. So, what is it? The Fair Tax Plan is legislation that currently exists. Every 2 years, I think that's the statistic. I think that's right, and Larry, my colleague, later on will set me straight. But every 2 years, we reintroduce legislation if it doesn't get ratified, and it's currently known as H.R. 25 or S-18 in the Senate. So this is something that's been introduced to Congress many times over. It's not new, and we've got several co-sponsors, and it's a piece of legislation that has some real prominent backing. So we'll talk about that. So when we talk about the current legislation being convoluted, you saw quite a statistic on that. The fair tax, in contrast, is really simple. It's 131 pages double-spaced. You can download this, read it, and understand it. And, you know, simple is better. So there's something really, really attractive to a thoughtful piece of legislation that is really comprehensive and yet extremely simple, given the complexity of most legislation that's put forth. So the fair tax supports growth. So what it is a consumption tax, or another way to say that is a sales tax. And a sales tax taxes consumption, which has been proven over and over and over again through the years. We've done many webinars on this, that consumption is much more reliable than taxing income. Yeah, that's just a fact. So you only pay taxes on what you spend, not on what you earn, and it eliminates all the federal taxes and repeals the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment giving Congress power to tax income. So we're talking the payroll tax, Medicare and Social Security taxes, this the alternative minimum tax, the capital gains taxes, and of course the income tax, personal and corporate income taxes, the death tax. I mean, this goes on and on. All of the taxes that the federal government impedes on us, they all go away, and it's replaced by one simple, fair, transparent, progressive, not regressive, but progressive tax, and it's just taxed on what it is that we consume. And so it's fully transparent, and you'll know this because there's only one tax. It's a consumption tax on new and retail goods and services. So important to know here, it occurs at a 23%, and let me actually back up for a second. So I want to give you an example here. So first of all, a couple of things to say about this. There's no taxes levied on business-to-business transactions. So a good way to illuminate this is the example I like to use is a home builder. So a home builder is a business. And when the home builder purchases all of its inputs, so everything from land down to the screws that it takes to build a home, the fair tax is not levied on this. And they build this home, and they go to sell it, and when they sell it for the very first time, it's considered a brand new good. And it's happening at the retail level because who's going to buy it? A consumer. And when that consumer buys it, the fair tax will be embedded in it. And when they buy it, they will be paying the fair tax, and the home builder is responsible for setting aside 23% of what they receive for the purchase price of that home, and every month or quarter they will remit 23% of all of their gross receipts or all of their revenue or sales to their state sales tax bureau, who will then turn it on to the Department of the Treasury. And when that consumer lives in that home for however many years they live in it, and they go to sell it again, it now becomes what we would call a used good. And the next time the home is sold and purchased by a new consumer, the fair tax is not levied. And that goes on forever. So that's an example of how the fair tax works and who pays it. Now, many of you, it's very natural right now to be thinking, well, boy, it's going to really put a damper on new home builds. Well, that's not actually true. And I'm going to talk about this later on in the presentation, because it's very natural to think that the home builder, the business, is going to jack the price up 23%. See, they're not going to do that. And the reason they're not going to do that is because they no longer pay business taxes, and they no longer have any cost to comply to the federal tax code. And we'll talk about that in detail. All right, so we've got a lot of benefits of the fair tax once it gets implemented, and we'll talk about a number of these and show you here. So currently it's estimated that globally $120 trillion in global offshore wealth or assets. You know, we're talking a lot of cash, we're talking cash that's put into different investments that are purposefully held offshore and not brought into the United States, into businesses or into the economy in any way, so that businesses and individuals can shield their wealth and their assets from being subject to income taxes and capital gains taxes, whether it's in our country or, for that matter, in any country. And the moment that we go to the fair tax system, that money starts to organically come back into the United States, and a lot of it is going to come back in the form of businesses expanding, which is really extraordinary. You know, imagine $1 to $2 trillion coming in every year organically, as opposed to the Federal Reserve or the government printing $1 trillion and really messing with inflation. You know, this all happens organically. So one of the big things that's going to happen is businesses are going to expand, and as part of that, the U.S. is going to become a corporate headquarter haven. See, there's going to be no corporate income taxes, and we will have the lowest corporate income tax structure in the world. And businesses from around the world will begin to locate their business in the United States, and they will build infrastructure, they will expand, they will hire, and boy, what a boon it's going to be to our economy when you know, hundreds of businesses flock here to take advantage of the corporate income tax rate. You know, there's a big deal right now. If you're paying attention to it economically, there's something called inversion that's been threatened to put an end to by President Trump. And inversion is when international businesses that are headquartered in the United States, that are U.S. businesses, they move their business overseas to countries like Ireland, so that they can save many millions of dollars in federal taxes. And yeah, this no longer becomes a problem. So we keep the corporate headquarters here, and then we attract a lot of them, and you know, we just don't have the mess that we're in right now. So then the other thing is that the underground economy, estimated at $2 trillion, they pay their fair share. So you've got undocumented workers, of course. You've got people who are skirting the tax system. You've got, you know, just people who are either criminals or, yeah, I already said it, undocumented people, and they don't pay any taxes. Well, now every time they go to the grocery store, or they go to the Gap to buy a pair of jeans, or they go buy a new car, or whatever it is, you know, everybody pays their fair share, and that $2 trillion gets subject to taxation, fair taxation. So what happens is you've really broadened the base here, because as many of you likely know, only 50%, really only approximately 50% of Americans actually pay any tax. Well, when we broaden the base, everybody's going to pay their fair share, and we're going to demonstrate later on that the fair tax has a really brilliant provision written into it that is going to properly untax or reimburse really all Americans, and especially have a positive impact on lower income class Americans, so that their tax burden doesn't hurt them. Yeah, so we've got some incredible things happening with our economy. And by the way, think about this. You know, the average American's income has the potential to go up over 25%. Because what happens is, let's say somebody's earning gross $5,000 a month, and they take home, let's call it, I don't know, I'll make up a number here, $3,800 because of their tax withholdings. Well, now what they gross, the $5,000, they take home. That's a substantial increase. Plus they can save money on purchasing used goods. And we'll show you something else later on in the presentation where they will actually get an income stream, a separate income stream coming into their house every month through the fair tax. So, that kind of increased disposable income across millions of Americans, like, that's a big deal. People are going to spend that money. That's going to be a huge boon for retail. So I wanted to spend a little extra time here and really draw emphasis to, how the fair tax is going to be a massive, massive boon to our economy in a really organic way. All right, let's keep moving. So, yeah, really, really efficient way that this thing really gets executed. So we've got 45 states that currently collect a state sales tax. We will leverage that infrastructure, and those inform what we call state sales tax bureaus. Yeah, likely most of that infrastructure is already in place, and they will be responsible from collecting from businesses, not from households. So look at the second bullet point. We get about 80% more efficient by collecting from 80% less people, less entities. Yeah, it's really smart. There's only one state sales tax form to fill out. It's really simple. Tell us how much money you made in revenue, how much you brought in, sorry, not how much you made, how much revenue you brought in, multiply it by 23%, that's what you remit. And there's an incentive for the states and their bureaus to collect it because they're going to be funded by part of the revenue that they collect, which is a really smart thing to do, right? Like, kind of like a company, the way that they pay for their salespeople is by commission. Yeah, it's just a really smart way to fund an infrastructure. And now let's talk about some of the inefficiencies here of the IRS. It costs $13 billion to run. They only collect about 75% of what it should collect. Yeah, think about that. I mean, think about that for a second. Imagine an entity that costs $13 billion to run, and with inside of $13 billion, think of the assets that they have and the resources at their disposal. With $13 billion, they're only operating at 75% efficiency. Yeah, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of a business that would be filing for Chapter 13. Like, it would be going out of business real fast. So the fair tax would eliminate the IRS inside of the first 3 years. So yeah, it's not an efficient organization, and the crafters of the fair tax legislation, really recognize this and would just do away with it, saving the government $13 billion, by the way. Okay, so yeah, by the way, your privacy gets protected. I mean, you pay your fair share of taxes when you make purchases over the course of a year, and there's no filling out detailed income tax form. Like, that's just a really smart thing. So, yeah, one other thing actually to say here is I have, as a self-employed business owner, have spent several hours and many, many thousands of dollars in the last 60 days reviewing and prepping and analyzing and pulling together things that I need to pull together to prepare and submit my taxes. And some of you likely have done that. Some of you, maybe it's been more time, energy, and money, and maybe it's been a little bit less. But I can promise you that this brain and this body is better served for our economy thinking about how I can be better at what I do in the world, in my business, how I can grow it, how I can become more competitive, and how I can better serve my clients, and as a result, grow and expand organically. I am better used by this country in that capacity than collecting receipts. Like, really. And if we think about that collectively, you know, imagine 120 million entities, 120 million households who can put forth collectively their time and their brain power and their creativity and their hands towards business and finance and growing. Like, that is worth billions of dollars. Billions. So yeah, this thing makes a lot of sense. And I've gone on to say, look, even if it doesn't make a difference for me financially, and it does in a big way, but even if it didn't, boy, what an extraordinary opportunity we would have as a country if we took the collective brain power and physical manpower from the opportunity cost that is created by filing our taxes every year and put it towards working. Pretty amazing to think about. Okay, so we talked earlier about why the fair tax was really fair, and we want to demonstrate that for you, especially fair for lower income class Americans, and we're going to show you this. So there's a really brilliant element of the fair tax called the prebate. And the prebate assures no one pays federal tax up to the poverty level. And we're going to explain this to you. I actually just want to do a quick sound check. I had some things come up on my computer saying my connection was bad. So could I get my colleague Larry just to unmute and check in? Am I coming through okay, Larry?
I have been hearing you perfectly.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. Great. So the prebate is an element of the fair tax that really creates fairness and untaxes all Americans, not just lower income Americans, but all Americans up to the poverty line. So what you want to do is move your eyeballs to the right side of the screen, and let's look at the green section. So let's say you've got a 2-adult household with 2 kids, average American family of 4 people. The Department of Health and Human Services has created poverty level spending thresholds. And that's what you see in what we call the annual consumption allowance column. Yeah, what that means is they're saying when a family of 4 spends only $32,480 or less, they're spending at the poverty level limit, meaning they're taking every dollar that comes into their family and they are likely only spending that on the basic necessities, you know, food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and likely medical and health, and everything else, like they don't have enough money to spend on anything else. Poverty level threshold of 32 grand and change. Okay, so if you multiply that 32,000 and change by 23%, the fair tax rate, you'll get $7,470 divided by 12 months. And every month at the beginning of the month, the federal government direct deposits $623 into every qualifying family household bank account, reimbursing them in advance of the month for the fair tax that they will get levied on them for their poverty level spending, for their spending up to the poverty level. Yeah, so think about that. Think about what I said earlier. The average American has an income that is going to increase by about 25% or more because there's no more gross pay, net pay. There's no more federal tax withholdings. They get 100% of their gross pay. They get the prebate every single month, and they can choose to purchase used goods. Yeah, that's really smart. Really, really smart and really, really fair. And an important thing to note, because look, it's really easy for opponents of the fair tax to say, well, yeah, my opponent who has this new tax plan, yeah, that person, my opponent, you know, they want to tax you by an additional 23%, and it's really going to hurt the lower class, lower income class. Yeah, that's just not true. They're telling lies. So let's look at prices. I talked about this with the home builder, and you know, right now business income taxes and their cost to comply to the tax code are passed off to the consumer, reflected in the price tag. So when we go to the store right now and buy a pair of designer jeans, like, you can count on the fact that you're actually paying your little share of that business's business taxes and their cost to comply to the tax code. That's reflected in the price that they put on their price tag. So we're actually paying double right now. We're paying income taxes, and in effect we're paying a sales tax, but it's just disguised. And the business income taxes and their cost to comply to the tax code right now are what we call an embedded hidden tax, and it's approximately 22%. That's the average across all retail industries. You know, it's a little higher in some, a little less in others, but the average is 22%. And so when the fair tax gets implemented, your embedded costs for a business are eliminated, and the fair tax goes in. So 22% out, 23% in. Now, it's not quite a wash due to some relatively complex factors and probably a 1 to 2 year transition of businesses kind of, you know, sorting out how this whole thing is going to go for them. You are likely going to see prices increase somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% in the first year. But here's what will happen. As businesses figure out their financial model and recognize they no longer have corporate income tax, they no longer have costs to comply to the tax code, they no longer have payroll taxes to pay, well, they're going to make a play for market share by lowering their prices. And most of their competitors, you know, all the big retailers, competitors will follow suit. So in 2 to 3 years, you're going to have prices at the same as they were like right now, and not have any income tax. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So quite a financial model here, guys. So we have single-handedly dismantled the 7 barriers or the impediments that our current tax code puts drag on our economy right now, and it's just a really brilliant piece of legislation. And if you think about that, why wouldn't somebody want that? Well, the only reason they wouldn't want it is because somehow it hurts them. So lobbyists, 50% of lobbyists are tax lobbyists who lobby Congress to manipulate the corporate income tax code. And when the corporate income tax code goes away, they're not needed. So they're out of a job. And politicians don't like it because they get to really maneuver inside a 75,000-page tax code and manipulate it in ways that we never know about it. And they like that. You know, it gives them a lot of power. Well, that power goes away when they don't have access to just, you know, altering our sales tax number. Yeah. So if somebody says they're against it, like the only reason they're against it is out of self-interest. You know, imagine the lobbyist saying to the politician, you don't want to vote for that thing because if you do, by the way, you're going to lose your power, and you know that $1 million that we just dumped in your re-election campaign? Yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. Oh. Well, yeah, maybe I won't vote for it then. That's what you've got going on here, ladies and gentlemen. So we've given you an overview of the fair tax, and you've got questions and we have answers. So we're going to go ahead and pause before our special topic, and we are going to take a number of your questions, and then after we do that, we are going to continue. And we must be doing a good job, Larry, with our presentation because we actually only have one question right now.
I see that, but it's a good one.
Yeah, you want to tackle it?
Sure. Okay, I don't know if I'm talking to Karen or Ken right now, but let's just say I'm talking to Kay. And the question is, this is so everybody else knows what the question is. The fair tax sounds great. However, what about people that are retired, only receive Social Security, and have a hard time currently paying 8% sales tax? How are they going to be able to exist on their income from Social Security when they are no longer receiving a paycheck? Your question, as you've put it, has a simple answer, but there are more complex answers for others who are seniors receiving Social Security plus other forms of income. But to answer your question directly, Kay, don't forget to take into account that before the fair tax is added, the hidden tax, the taxes and compliance costs that are embedded in the price of everything we buy today is taken away. Businesses no longer have to pay those taxes, so they can lower their costs, and their costs will go lower in a lowered status through the supply chain until it gets to the retailer, who then adds the sales tax, which is 23 cents out of each dollar. So the prices are going to be pretty much compared to what we have today. And as Mark pointed out, there may be a 10 to 15% increase at the retail level. Following that, though, they will also qualify for the prebate. Now, the prebate is going to pay them, once again, for everything that they would be purchasing up to the poverty line for their family. Now, I've got to tell you that we know that if retired people are living only on the income from Social Security, they're living at the poverty level with very, very small percentage of exceptions. So if they're living at the poverty level now, when they come under the fair tax, because they're getting the prebate, they won't see any real change in their financial picture. Plus any interest that they may be accumulating from savings or anything like that will no longer be taxed. So that's the simple answer for that scenario. Now, just to broaden this a little bit, let's say that they're getting also funds from a 401k or some other retirement pension plan that was funded with pre-tax dollars. They did not pay tax on the income when they earned it that they deposited into these funds. Under that arrangement, they were supposed to pay tax on it when they take distributions on those dollars. Under the fair tax, they will not be paying income tax on those funds, so they will actually be seeing a landfall, a windfall of money that they did not expect previously. Mark?
Yeah, really thorough, Larry. Thank you. All right. Yeah, Karen and Ken, if you have any other questions, please write in, and also feel free to write in and let us know if that was really helpful in Larry's response. All right. So the next question is from Dave. Dave writes in, who administers the fair tax if there is no IRS? Who manages the distribution and determines how many people in each family and how much they receive? Yeah. Larry, do you want to tackle that too?
Sure enough. Okay, the administration of the fair tax will be handled by the state Treasury Department. 45 states in America already have a sales tax, so they are well attuned to how to monitor that and how to enforce it. What's more is, because there are so much less taxpayers under the fair tax, only those who sell to the end consumer, it'll be very easy, it'll be much easier for the state treasury departments to enforce the fair tax. They being closer to the businesses in their state, know what to expect from those business revenues. They've been collecting a state sales tax for a number of years. If the proportion of federal sales tax that is reported by a business doesn't line up with the sales tax that's being reported, there's something hokey going on there, and that business will be in for a good audit. Okay. As far as the distribution, once a year or sooner if there is a change to the family status, the head of the family will submit a form to the state treasury department identifying all of the members of that household. Each member, let's take the example of 2 adults and any number of children. There will be an allotment based on those. That would be 5. Mark showed you the example for a family of 4, I believe. For a family of 5, they would just get a little bit larger prebate each month. They get $703 instead of $623. So that's how it's accounted for initially. If there is an adult dependent for some medical reason, for example, then that adult would be considered another member and be just one more dependent in that family. But if there is an adult in the family or a couple of adults who are above the age of 18 and who are working, they will qualify for their own prebates. And so they would file on their own, and they would get the prebate for a single person to reimburse them for the taxes that they may pay on their spending for essentials. Mark?
Really thorough as always, Larry. Thank you. Don asked the question, what happens in the states which currently have no sales tax? Thank you, Don. So real simple answer here. The fair tax is strictly relegated to the funding the federal government. It's strictly relegated to federal taxation. So the answer to your question is nothing. Nothing formally. So in other words, the states that do or don't have sales tax, like nothing is going to change there. However, we suspect that as the economy really booms, state and local governments will likely move to a sales tax model, and those states that have income taxes will likely, there's a good chance they'll eliminate them and just create a state sales tax or bump up their state sales tax to follow suit because they see how effective it is. Yeah, and by the way, Florida and Texas are 2 really great examples of that. Florida, which Larry and I both live here, is a financially really sound state, and you know, there's been a lot of data to demonstrate that it's because it does not have a state income tax, and as a result, boy, like, you know, it is really attractive to a lot of people and businesses. So yeah, that's just one thought. I said a little bit more than what you bargained for there, Don, but yeah, real simple. No impact on the states because it's just happening at the federal level.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah.
One thing you overlooked, that until they make a decision to go with the sales tax on their own, I think Don's question was to the point of how is the federal sales tax going to be handled by those states who today do not have a sales tax?
Good.
Right, the answer to that is, Don, they have a choice. They can create their own sales tax department within their Department of Treasury and administer the sales tax like the other states do, or they can contract with another state or with the federal government to administer and enforce the sales tax in their state. And that is the answer as it's written in the legislation. Mark?
Thank you, Larry. Okay, great. So Ed writes in, if the collected tax goes to the state's revenue agency, does any go to the U.S. Treasury? The answer is yes. They turn it over to the U.S. Treasury. If some does, will it stay in the U.S. Treasury and not be transferred to the Federal Reserve System? I'm unclear as to the latter part of that question. Larry, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either, Mark, but the Treasury is who collects the money. I'm not sure what role the Federal Reserve plays in the collecting or the paying of tax funds, tax revenues. As long as the state, well, the states are required, they're mandated to send it to the Treasury Department, and the Treasury Department will have a small additional department once the IRS is gone that will be a coordinator for state activities, and it'll be like, they'll be like facilitators for the facilitators. The states facilitate the collection and enforcement of the fair tax, and the federal government's sales tax department will facilitate the operation of the states to see that everything is going as smoothly as they would like it to go. Mark?
Yeah. And Ed wrote in the Grace Commission report, which must be something that we can Google offline and talk to us about how there's something happening with where money leaks from the Treasury to the Federal Reserve or something like that, I imagine.
Yeah, I've not heard of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate the question. All right, we've got some more questions coming in. Let's pause for a moment here, and I want to go to our special topic here. It's given the timeliness of where we're at as it relates to tax reform. We've got to have our voice heard, and so we want to take you through how to do that. Like if and look, let's start out by saying this: we are here for a purpose. And like when I say we're here, we're on this webinar for a purpose, to effectively educate what the fair tax is, why we believe it's better based on data, which, by the way, $22 million of independent third-party support has gone in to fund the fair tax legislation being written, which is the most amount of money ever spent on tax reform privately, ever. And many of the nation's most brilliant PhD economists were involved in crafting this. Like this, wasn't done by, a couple of monkeys in a locked up room. Like you've got something that has been extremely thoughtfully crafted here. Like more than any other piece of tax reform that has ever been put forth, period. So you've got something that's, really accurate and well thought out. And we're here for a purpose. As we share this with you, we want to inspire you to choose a side here. In other words, either the fair tax aligns for you as something that you see can make a difference for our country and is going to be better for you, your family, your community, your state, and your country, or you think our current tax system is better. And we're telling you, we're requesting of you that if what you hear here tonight aligns for you, then we encourage strongly, to the point of requesting you to really be in action. And that's what leads us to this part of our presentation here. This is going to demonstrate how you can be in action. And before I get to it, let me also say I am a stand that inaction is not an option. Yeah, the fair tax either aligns for you or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then that means that you believe our current tax system is better. What we've got is better. And if that's what you believe, that's really great. Like, I honor you in taking and having that belief. And if what you've heard here tonight really makes sense to you and it aligns for you, then I am a request for you to be in action. And here's how you can do that. So the way to make your voice heard is a few things here. So number one, I intended for this to come up bullet point by bullet point, but apparently my technical PowerPoint skills need some sharpening. Yeah, anyway, we'll go through them one by one. So email President Trump. There is the official way that you can reach him, and then when you go to that website, you want to click on Reflections for the President, and then you can type whatever it is that you want. One of the things you might say is, hey, don't forget, President Trump, that your vice president, when he was in Congress, was a co-sponsor of this legislation. Yeah, guys, Vice President Pence is a fair tax supporter. When he was in Congress, he was a co-sponsor. That's big. Real big. Okay, Popbox, really important website. This is a website that lists all of the legislation that is currently put forth in Congress. And you go and you create a free account. You search for, in two places, both in the House and the Senate, by the two different nomenclatures I gave you there, or titles, and then click support, and then leave a comment why you support it. The third bullet point is to contact and be in touch with your congressperson, and we suggest doing all four, right? Email, phone, and visit, and that's a way to be consistent. And what not to do is to sign some, mass-marketed petition, because those go largely unheard. So, you want to physically write them, write an email, phone them, show up, make an appointment, show up in person, and when you write your correspondence, it should be personalized. Like, here's why this is important for our district, and you want to reference our district because they don't really care about what happens outside their district. They care about being reelected. Yeah, and then lastly, we need your, here's me being really transparent. We need your money. Yeah, how many people are brave enough to say that, as forward as I say it? We need your money. We need you to make a contribution. And one of the best ways, and here's what we do with the money, by the way. It goes towards effectively targeting people of influence in Congress, and with enough money, hiring really effective lobbyists of our own that can then be a mainstay up in Washington, D.C. That's what we do with the money. And so you can make a contribution by becoming a FairTax 1040 Club member. And what you do is you go to the website fairtax.org, and you go to the very far right where it says donate and click on join the 1040 club, put in your credit card information, and we're asking for a 6-month commitment that you will give $10.40 to the AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation, which is the governing nonprofit body of the fair tax legislation, and contribute. We are a request for action, and we are a stand for not having inaction. So if the Fair Tax aligns for you, we're requesting tonight that you go to fairtax.org and become a 1040 Club member. That's our request. And it will make a difference. Yeah. Great. All right. So that's how you can have your voice be heard and make a difference. And now we're going to go back to questions because we want to get them answered so you can determine if it aligns for you. All right, I'll ask my colleague Larry to unmute himself here.
I have.
Rebecca writes in.
Rebecca.
She wonders if President Trump is considering the fair tax legislation and what are the plans to get him moving in the direction. Well, I think I spoke to that. And he currently does not support the fair tax. At least he doesn't. Yeah, he hasn't said that he's willing to look at it. Larry, is there anything you want to expand on based on what I've already said?
No, but that's exactly the reason why the call to action to communicate with him is so important. And I have a list of some one-line thoughts that has been created by a guy named Kerry Bowers, who some of you may know. And I'll be happy to email this to you if you will just email me asking for it so I know who you are. But here's one simple example of how of one of the lines that we have in here. Before the ink has dried on the Congress and the President Trump's tax reform plans, the 400+ annual changes will start again. Can you imagine that? 400 changes per year? Now, Mark, just as on a side here, I was reading something earlier on the Better Way plan from the Ways and Means Committee. They've got this document called A Better Way to Do Tax Reform. And it's quite interesting, the conflict I picked up here. They talk about the 70,000+ pages of code, etc. And they say that it's almost triple the amount of bureaucratic red tape since the last reformed the code in 1986. And then 3 paragraphs down they say, it's been nearly 30 years since we last updated our tax code. The world has dramatically changed over the past 3 decades, but our tax system has gone unchanged. What a lie that is. These guys would never make a living as salespeople if they were being paid for their product sales, because once they get caught lying like that, nobody would buy from them. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Dave writes in, what is the likelihood that this will pass? It does not seem to have a lot of support. Yeah, Dave, the best way that I could answer that is by repeating my request for support. Like, look, anything worthwhile takes a lot of effort. And, you know, there's been a lot of people that are just really comfortable with what we've got and really comfortable with mediocrity. And, you know, so the answer to your question is, what is the likelihood? Well, yeah, if every single person that ever was on this webinar over the last 9 years actually followed through on what we requested that they did, the likelihood would be extremely high. So, it's just a matter of whether or not people are willing to actually be responsible and be in action. So I would return that question back to you. And I would say, what is the likelihood that you are going to be in action if this aligns for you? And if everybody took a real stand for it, then we would be infinitely further than where we are. Yeah, and then here's the technical answer to your question. There's currently 36 co-sponsors, and that it was set back to 0 when Congress turned over as of the last election. And I think last year we had the most co-sponsors that we've ever had. It may have been over 100. I could be wrong, but it was close to that. Larry, do you know what the number was?
I don't recall. I think it was something like 78.
Okay, I was a little ambitious then. Yeah. So, yeah, we got to do some work, but yeah, not insurmountable as long as people are willing to be in action. Yeah, so Larry, tell people how they can get involved, like with their time.
Well, with social media, there's a lot of people you can talk to that you communicate with now, out of state even, and let them know about this neat idea called the FairTax. As Mark said, we've got 36 co-sponsors in a brand new Senate, brand new Congress, and there are 5 in the Senate, by the way. And let them understand and invite them to attend a webinar. Invite them to email me with any questions they might have, or give you a question and you email it to me for them. One way or another, we'll get answers to you, and you'll be able to respond to the questions that you are getting. But it's a matter of just talking. You got to be willing to talk to other people about this idea and understand that if we don't do this, we're going to be stuck with more of what we've had 103 years of. It brings me to another line on this table I told you about, on this list I told you about, that is very appropriate here. It says to President Trump, you can't make America great again using the same tools that made it bad, income-based taxes. That's the truth. And when you get to understand those things yourself, you will become so convinced, so committed to getting this idea passed, you will call your congressman, you will fax them. Faxing them is a great idea because they never turn off the fax machine. And just let that paper run out there, send out 100 different faxes. Get people you're talking to send faxes also. PopVox is another good tool like Mark mentioned. But you've just got to communicate, guys, gals. It's not that difficult. And if there is not a local organization, a local FairTax group in your area, start one. It's not that difficult. I did it 11 years ago, I guess now. It started with 4 women in my dining room table here. I supplied the coffee, some cookies, and we talked about it. 2 of them I never saw again. 2 of them hung with me for several years. But meanwhile, we've got in the Central Florida area over 10,000 supporters for the FairTax. You can do the same thing. It's just a matter of talking to people. Mark?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and thank you, Randy Fisher, who's really, we've got a lot of long-time supporters and people who are really have invested a lot of their time, energy, and personal resources on with us tonight. Randy Fisher, Ron Malero, David Leake, and there's others. There's certainly others, so forgive me if I failed to mention your name. And Randy let us know that there is 83 co-sponsors in the 114th Congress that ended before coming into this year that supported the FairTax. Thank you, Randy. By the way, I put up on there the whitehouse.gov/contact website for President Trump, and Ron astutely wrote in, yeah, you could do that every day. It's not limited to just once. So, you can get on there every day and burn up Trump's email with the FairTax. Thank you, Ron. All right, you are welcome, Rebecca. Really great to have you here. All right. Okay, Larry. There's a question that comes in from Don who says, I have a skeptic pose the following question to me. Explain how an individual at the higher income levels does not have the advantage of purchasing products outside the U.S., which are not subject to the 23% tax. Not sure if that question has any basis, but that's what he hits me with all the time.
Okay, well that's simple enough. It is subject to the fair tax. The fair tax is a destination-based tax. So when somebody buys something from another country, whether it be a watch or a Mercedes or a Rolls-Royce or a yacht or an airplane, when they come into America, Customs will take care of collecting 23% of that purchase and turn it over to the Treasury Department. So there's no way of getting away from the fair tax. And you know, one of the things that is so good about this legislation is that it treats everyone equally without exception. And it treats all purchases of new goods and services without exception. The only exceptions that are allowed under the fair tax and will not be taxed are that of used goods and that of education, whether it be college or professional education that you might be going to, or a seminar or something for as part of your career advancement hopes. Those are the only exceptions, and that's because getting educated is an investment in human capital. And since purchasing of regular capital equipment is not going to be taxed under the fair tax, it was thought fair that investments in human capital would not be taxed either. Mark?
Yeah, and Josh writes in, the fair tax also regulates foreign trade. It functions as an import tariff, which is effectively what Larry just said. Great. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Larry. So Daniel asked the question, how are we certain that the embedded taxes on goods and services will become 23% less expensive? Yeah, so Daniel, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the 23% the 22% is an average across all retail industries. You know, it's different industry to industry. For some it's less, for some it's more. And because of, so the answer to your question is, the businesses aren't going to, you know, recreate their entire business around a sales tax rate. You know, they're going to adjust their price tags accordingly. After, though, they remove the embedded taxes. So the point is, some are going to raise their prices, you know, maybe 5%, maybe some are going to be 15%, maybe some are going to be 10%, and maybe some are going to be 0%. So we can't be certain that the embedded taxes on goods and services will become 23% less expensive, like, you know, purely in a vacuum. But we are sure that the embedded costs to comply to the tax code plus corporate income taxes go away. That's a fact. And that the percentage is going to be a little bit skewed and different based on what business and industry that they're in. And once it gets implemented, every business will figure out their own financial model around how they may need to adjust their product or services prices to stay solvent and profitable. Yeah. Great. So, Larry, talk to Robert, who wrote in, what about medical procedures? Presumably he's wondering, does the fair tax get levied for medical procedures?
Absolutely. As I said just a moment ago, there are no exemptions to the fair tax other than used goods and education fees. So medical procedures will be taxed. However, the medical industry, along with the construction industry and the financial industry, are three industries that are at the highest amount of embedded taxes and compliance costs in the nation. They're at the 25+%. So in other words, for every dollar you spend on a medical procedure today, or on construction jobs, or on financial services, 25 cents of that dollar is embedded costs that are going to go away. to give you an idea. So, but then on the other end, you look at the grocery markets and things like that, they're down at the 20% level. And so their margin of price decrease will be a little bit less than is what is available in the financial industry or the medical industry. Mark?
Yep, great. Well, we've got a couple of comments left, Larry. Do you want to tackle those, and then we'll wrap up?
Well, sure, I could try that, Mark. We'll go back up to the top here and see what we've got. Okay, well, Josh said early on, he asked, since the Fair Tax Act has been stuck on the House Ways and Means Committee for 15 years, then that's a good argument to get rid of the committee. Yeah, it is, but you know, they're politicians, and it doesn't matter what committee they're on, they're going to have some effect on how taxes are levied. That's the power that our Constitution gives Congress. So what I would say is this: the right for women to vote took 72 years, and we've only been at this in legislation for about 15 or 16. So I don't expect to go 72 years. I don't have that much patience. In fact, frankly, I don't have that much life left ahead of me, but that's another topic. We just have to work at it. The thing is, that Mark pointed out early on, is the opportunity, the best opportunity we have had over that period of time, the last 15 years, is right now, because tax change is coming. And the question is, are we going to have anything to determine what that change is going to be, or are we going to sit on our assets and let somebody else make the decisions for us? That's the question that's really at stake here tonight.
Yeah, Larry, I'm actually going to take it over from you, given the time, and I want to move people. Yeah, first of all, we really appreciate people being with us. It's it's past the hour, and man, what a demonstration of leadership it is to have taken time out of your evening to be with us. It really says that you care, that you're interested in this country and where we're going, and where we're not going. So we really appreciate you, and we want to close by really being on our last slide here. Look, like, this is our year, guys. The tax reform's coming, like Larry said. We can either influence it or we can sit on our hands. So 6 months, consider making a commitment to the 1040 Club, like really consider it, be in action in some way, and on the 4th Thursday of every month, invite everyone you know back to this webinar. And let's get people educated and fired up about the possibility for creating something that's going to have an incredible impact on the future of this country. So with that, I will leave any other closing remarks to my amazing colleague Larry and let him sign everyone off. And I thank everyone again for being here and wish you a great rest of your week. Larry?
Sure enough, yeah. Next month, March webinar, Mark has decided he's going to take a vacation and take his family offshore somewhere far away. And we have the honor, and I tell you, it's an honor, to have Phil Hinson doing the webinar for us next month. Some of you may know Phil, some of you may not, but Phil has been a shadow mentor for me for 11 years. He is a very, very sharp individual, very knowledgeable on the fair tax. I believe he's an accountant. He is one of the board members on Americans for Fair Taxation. So I encourage you to make a note on your personal calendars to join us next month and hear Phil do a presentation unlike what Mark has done today, but covering basically the same topics, just from his perspective. Meanwhile, good night and thanks for being with us.
Night, everybody.